Hi, welcome to Live Poet Society, USA edition. I am here with none other than Mr. Steve Wheeler. We are here today for an interview, a special interview about this new book, Creative Deviance. How are you doing, Steve?
Doing very well, thanks, Brandon. And I'm glad to see you've got a copy of that beast in your hand. It's nice to see it out in the wild.
Oh, I love it. I even love what you put on the back about aspiring poets to break free from tradition, embrace the art of creative risk. I love that. I love that. I love what this book's about. I love what it stands for and how you've written it. I mean, my goodness, Steve. My goodness. How long did this take you to write?
Around about 3 months.
This guy.
You've got to do the research on it, and then as you're researching, you write it. That actually took me a lot less time than any of my academic textbooks to write. It normally take between 6 months and a year to research. But gosh, I'm passionate about this, and so I know a lot about it, and therefore I could just bleed it out onto the page, as we say in poetry.
Oh, of course. So starting out, can you tell us a bit about yourself and Wheelsong Books? How was it formed? Why did you form Wheelsong Books? Just give us a little brief history.
The thing about me is that I've always been a bit of a maverick, a bit of a kind of, I don't like taking orders or instructions. I don't even read instructions when I have to put something together. I just do it intuitively. And if I get it wrong, I learn from that. That's my kind of mantra. But when I was a lot younger, I guess when I just left college, I trained as a graphic designer and photographer, and then as a fine artist, and then went into a college to work. And I was seconded to the library one week, and I was in there turfing out a whole load of old stock which they didn't want. They were saying, get rid of all this lot here. And then I was doing bookbinding, and while I was doing that, a whole pile of poetry books caught my eye, and they were throwing them out. And there was Dylan Thomas in there was Charles Bukowski, there was Philip Lamantia, Harold Norse, you name it. All the mavericks were there, and they were chucking them out. Yeah, absolutely. Because they had to make room for other stock, and they didn't want to keep them. So they were throwing them away. I said, can anyone take this? I said, yeah, just help yourself. And so I helped myself to a couple of bundles. I went home twice with my arms full. And all these poetry books are still on my shelf. Not this one, but the one upstairs. I've got 4 libraries in this house, and the poetry libraries upstairs. And the thing was, these guys, people like Dylan Thomas, with his style of writing, was full of imagery. Charles Bukowski just threw things out the window and spoke in free form. And these guys were just immense to me. E. Cummings was another one. A lot of American avant-garde writers, and I just hooked onto these guys, and I read them avidly, and decided that actually I could do this. I could express myself and my emotions in a different way, and so I started writing in a very similar way. Whales crashing through the undergrowth. The kind of the imagery of that. It's impossible, but in poetry, everything's possible. So that's the kind of person I became very, very young, still in my late teens, in my early 20s. And from then on, I progressed to performing poetry. So I became a performance poet and actually went out onto the stage and in front of people, which was a risk, because you never know how people are going to take this. I think one of my lines once got the audience absolutely rocking, and I remember it was, if you keep on doing it, you can go blind, deaf, or even political. And the whole audience just erupted in laughter. You could hear them, down the street. I thought, what did I say there? But they thought it was funny. So these kind of lines, if you can get a killer line in your poem, bang, you're in there, and then they're on your side then, and you can say what you want on the stage, in terms of poetry. So that's the kind of person I became. But all through my career, and if you read the book, you'll see that all through my career, I always got into trouble because I would rather ask for forgiveness than permission. I never asked for permission to do anything. I just did it to see what would happen. there you are.
And
So
just dealt with it afterwards, huh?
and when it comes to Wheelsong, of course, Wheelsong was formed in 2020, right at the height of the pandemic. And it was formed by my wife and I. We set up a limited company. And essentially, it was about trying to get my dad's books out there. Yeah, because my dad, as you probably know, Kenneth Wheeler, he's
I
a
love his poetry.
poet and a short story
Blogs.
writer. Yeah, and he wrote a lot of stuff, still does. And so a couple of the first two books out of the first four that came out were his. And I just put them out there onto Amazon because I suddenly realized that that's what we could do. And then I developed the skills then of creating books, designing covers, creating layouts, formats, writing blurb, that kind of stuff, all the stuff that you'd expect a publisher to do. And I became a publisher, and that's where Wheelsong has its genesis. So it's only 5 years old.
That's insane, especially for how many books that it already has under its belt and the quality of them books.
Yeah, something over 50 now, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, last year, what alone was 12 alone, huh?
Yeah, we decided to publish one a month last year. This year it's probably more like two a month.
Oh, yeah.
It's only February, and we've got another two coming out this week, so that'll be four before February's out.
I'm so excited to see what comes, ahead. So I guess starting and talking about this book, first of all, can you tell everyone what is the difference between experimental poetry and regular poetry? What's the difference there? What sets them apart?
How long have you got?
As long as you want, my friend.
Put it this way: before I discovered experimental poetry, I was writing greeting card stuff. It wasn't for greeting cards, but it reminded me of that. It was, very, very predictable. I would say boring because it used a lot of cliches that everyone else used. I would rhyme love with above. I would rhyme life with strife. I mean, and then I realized actually you didn't need to rhyme, and not only that, you didn't have to have a structure either. It could just flow. It could just hit you like a torrent, like a kind of an avalanche of words. And so I started writing avalanches of words. I started writing stuff freeform, stream of consciousness stuff, and so that's experimental poetry. Really, is anything that's out of the ordinary, anything that breaks the conventions. And if you want early kind of experimental poets, go back to Walt Whitman during the American Civil War, 1860. He was breaking form with stuff and really upsetting the establishment. Go back farther than him. Go back to Geoffrey Chaucer in the medieval times in England, even before Shakespeare. That era was full of mavericks, people who took the standard sonnet, which was a 10-step, a 5-step iambic pentameter, so 10 syllables, 5 steps in it, and they put 6 in, or removed one and put 4 in, and that literally outraged people. Wow. You can't do this with poetry. This is how poetry is meant to be done. And so basically they broke out of the box and did it their own way. And that's experimental poetry, breaking out of the box, especially the ones that you impose upon yourself because they're imaginary in your head.
Yeah. So breaking the predictable rhyme schemes, forms, all of that. That's starting to get on the side of the fence of being experimental.
Anything that's out of the ordinary is experimental. Anything that's new, anything that is kind of big C creativity, as we call it in the book. We talk about big C creativity in here, as opposed to small C creativity. Big C creativity is where you're doing something unique that nobody's ever done before in the history of humankind. And people think, oh, that's impossible because everyone's writing poetry. Actually, if you can come up with a line that nobody else has ever said before, that is big C creativity in my mind. And that's the holy grail of what we're looking for with experimental poetry. New stuff which makes people go, wow, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, because it's absolutely one very unique thing of experimental poetry is it's absolutely unpredictable. I love that about it. It's so unpredictable. How many of the techniques, when you started rebelling in your writing, were you already using before you actually researched into this? Because reading this book, I didn't even realize that I was already doing a couple of these things, and just
Well,
wondering if that kind of happened with you, I suppose.
well, look, you learn poetry in school, and you get it force fed into you, don't you? And you're told this is how poetry is done. It's implicit anyway. It's not necessarily overt, but it's implicit. And if you write in the same style, the teacher will give you a great big fat A. And you're conditioned to think that way. So everybody writes poetry the same way when they start out because that's the way it's always been done. But if you read this book and you look at some of the experiments and psychological studies that are in here, you'll see that actually no, that's social conditioning, and we're conditioned by our elders and by our teachers and by our peers to think in a particular way, and to break out of that is quite difficult. But if you can do it, you'll certainly be an avant-garde experimental poet.
You truly find freedom by doing that as well, and truly that's how your voice will stick out
Oh yeah,
tremendously,
that's going to be
tremendously.
unique. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I know you touched up a little bit about this, but how did the idea for Creative Deviance come about? Can you tell us a bit about your history with experimental poetry, which you did a bit, but what initially inspired your interest with it?
Well, my academic background, as you probably know, I was a university professor for many years, 20 odd years. And during that time, I was invited to travel around the world. I'd be doing keynote speeches all over the world, just about every continent I visited at some point, 45 different countries, giving speeches about doing things differently. Because as an educator, I'm fascinated by the way people learn. As a psychologist, I'm fascinated by the mechanisms of that learning. So therefore, when it comes to things like poetry, there are mechanisms that you can trigger to get you to think in different ways, to get you to break out of the box that I mentioned, this imaginary space that we contain ourselves within. So the whole point of it was that traveling around the world, I learned that there are these people in every organization who do things differently, and everyone looks at them strangely because they may be dressed differently, or maybe they speak differently, but they certainly think differently. And those guys are labeled as positive deviants, right? A positive deviant is somebody who does things completely different from everyone else, but they get brilliant results. And so they're kind of left alone in an organization to do stuff, although everyone frowns at them. And I think the frowning is based on jealousy, because they wish they could do it, but they haven't got the guts to do it, you know? So these positive deviants, I thought, is there a creative version of this? There must be. And then I looked up the term creative deviant, and yes, it exists, but it's not been spoken about much. It's spoken about kind of, shh, don't talk too much about this, but there are creative deviants out there. And so, you know, it's not really well known. So I thought, I'm going to write a book called Creative Deviance, and I'm going to explain this, and I'm going to show all the ways that you can possibly break that mold and really upset people. I mean, really upset people, and get them annoyed with you, and get them, you know, really kind of thinking, well, why is he doing this? Because that's what art should make you do. They say that everything can make you look, but only art can make you see. I mean, really see.
I love
Right?
that.
And that's what poetry is really all about for me, making people see.
It's such an immense craft. It really is. Um, can you give us the reader, anyways, a brief description of what they might find within the pages of Creative Deviance?
Well, you've got, I think it's 13 chapters, isn't it, to start with? Is it 12 chapters? 12 chapters, really. You've got a very, very large introduction, which lays out in no uncertain terms what it means to be an experimental poet and all the risks involved in it, and the kind of the turn back now, Dorothy signs. You know, if you haven't got the courage, then you stop at the first few pages, then you put the book down and walk away. But those who have got some courage in them, and some determination and maybe a bit of curiosity, they will read on. Right? Yeah, that's a goofy picture of me on the back taken by an old friend of mine with a weird lens, and I thought I've got to use that. It's me kind of peering around the corner, isn't it? Because that's what you do with this book. You peer around the corner and you go, you know, and you look through your eyes like watching a horror film, you know, because there are things in here which will shock you. I challenge anybody to get hold of this and not be shocked, because you will be shocked by it. You might even be offended by some of it, but because some of it is weird. I mean, well, let's face it, a lot of it's weird. It's not acceptable to a lot of poets, this kind of stuff. I would even go as far as to say, without being kind of superlative, that it actually preaches insurrection. It preaches apostasy. It promotes rebellion against the norm, and so that's why, you know, not many people will buy it. And that's why you probably won't buy it if you're watching now and you're thinking, ooh, this guy's a weirdo. Yeah, you probably won't buy the book because it will upset you if you buy it. It will rattle your cage and it'll make you think differently. And that's a warning, all right? That's a promise.
It certainly will. But with that being said, you know, getting past them comfort zones, if it does do that to you, it can be very rewarding, actually. I
Well,
guarantee going through this, and I'm already learning a bunch of things, but I guarantee anyone that gets this book and reads it, they're going to have a big variety to add to their arsenal and implement in their further articulations. You know what I mean? There's just a treasure trove of knowledge in here. And it's out of the box knowledge, all of it. And that's what's really unique about this book, is it's not just common poetry forms and techniques and all this. It's a lot of it's out of the box things. I was fascinated by your glossary, by the way.
oh, the glossary at the back. Yeah, I mean, that to me is an essential, because there's a lot of terms that I use in here which people won't understand or won't know about until they get exposed to them. They're kind of obscure terms. I mean, morphology is probably known by a lot of English teachers and scholars, but apart from that, you probably won't know what morphology means. Other words in here, like I don't know, installation, enjambment, portmanteau. These are words, semantics. These are words which are thrown around, but nobody really knows what they mean until they apply them in a real way. And that's what we try and do with the book. I think there's 54 different exercises in there, and they get weirder and weirder as you go along. I think one of them is one of the ones I like the most is write a love poem using just a scientific magazine or a textbook. And what you've got to do is you've got to take the lines out from the textbook and turn them into a love poem. See if you can do that.
Yeah, that's going to make some intriguing love poems. Some very unusual ones at that.
It's been done. There's been a few people that have already tried it online. So I've really been gratified by that, getting people to try these new things. And yeah, you don't have to try the exercises, but you know, if you do get the book, be prepared to be surprised and a bit shocked. And then, you know, if you really feel courageous, then try some of the exercises and see how it's going to change your writing.
All in good ways, I guarantee. All in good ways. So, what is the main goal of this book that you envision when you're like, I want to write this book? Was it only just to kind of get people to start thinking outside the box with poetry, or was there a bit even bigger picture that?
Well, really, I've got to get that stuff out because it's in me, and I'm doing it all the time, and therefore I want to show other people how to do it as well, or how to get them to think even farther, because these are just germs and seeds. They're not really, it's not the fully formed picture, but you can take this a lot farther if you want to do that. If you're weirder than I am, then you can take this a lot farther, and I'm sure people will and already have. I've seen some pretty good experimental poetry. There's a hashtag, isn't there? Invisible EXP, Invisible EXP, with a hashtag in front of it. And if you search for that, you'll find all of the weird and wonderful stuff that people are doing because they've read the book, you know, or they're plowing their way through it anyway. But the book itself is meant, I think, to rattle people's cages. It's meant to jar people out of the lethargy that they can find themselves in sometimes when they write poem after poem after poem after poem after poem, and they get into a rut. So it's to kind of jar people out of that. And I think a lot of people who, if they're really serious with poetry, they do want to get out of that rut that they find themselves in. And if so, then that book's for you.
Absolutely. And sometimes we don't even know we're in that rut until we, let's say, complete a manuscript or a large body of work. And then we're like, what am I doing? This is getting old. You know what I mean? I need to do something else. I know that happens to me time after time. So a book like this is a blessing to someone like me. And I'm crazy too. So that on top of
You
it.
certainly are crazy.
Yeah.
But so am I. But yeah, I think it's like the Matrix experience, isn't it? You wake up and suddenly realize that you're not who you think you are, or you're not where you think you should be, or you're
No.
not doing what you think you were doing, and suddenly a whole vista opens up in front of you. I talk about the 9 dots experiment in here, which is a 1930s scientific experiment by a psychologist called Dunker, who was German, and really it blows your mind when you try and do that, try and solve that problem. But when you see the solution to it, you realize that actually all of the all of the restrictions that you've perceived are actually unreal. They're false.
You put them there.
And you put them there by looking at what you see in front of you, and you impose it upon yourself. And that's what we do with poetry as well. We impose upon ourselves restrictions and constraints which really don't have to be there.
No, absolutely not. Are there any special plans involving experimental poetry going forward?
I just want to see how it pans out, really. I mean, if enough people buy it, and it is kind of selling steadily, if enough people want to buy it, and clearly, if you go onto Amazon and get it, it'll be twice the price that Wheelsong can sell it to you. So come to Wheelsong first and get a price from us, and then you'll see that it's about half the price. It is actually half the price exactly of Amazon. So if enough people actually do buy it, then we might decide to go farther with it. I think that there was talk about forming an experimental poetry group within Invisible Poets for those who were actually interested, because most people aren't interested in it. Most people are just happy to toddle along on their little pathway, creating the same stuff time and time again. That's fine. There's no criticism of that. But for those who want to break out of that rut and do something spectacular, something which will make people sit up and take notice, then maybe we might set up a poetry group within the group, and actually do some formal instruction and experimentation together.
How exciting. Hear this, everyone? Let's
Well,
really get behind this so we can make this happen. I know I would love that. I would love that. I feel like my demented self would be able to thrive in them conditions. You know what I mean? Oh man. Are there any last words or announcements or anything you want to throw out there for these people?
No, I think we've covered a lot of what the book is all about. There are examples of poems in here, and there's a lot of history in here about how how it evolved, how the idea of experimental poetry evolved, right from medieval times right up through to the time just before the First World War and just during the First World War, when all these new movements came out, all these art movements which had poetry involved in them. And I mentioned a lot of people in here which and talk about their work and even provide some examples. I mean, there's some wonderful stuff in. I mean, that one there, for instance. I mean, that's actually by Matt Elmore.
Yeah, I looked at that just earlier.
Swarm of bees, isn't it? It's like a swarm of bees. But if you read through it carefully, you'll see why he's done it that way, and you'll see the actual nature of it unfolding in front of you. It just takes you a while to actually to get there, but it's worth looking at. And there's another one in here which I just show you. This one here, Ode to Old Age, and you can see basically it's the same line repeated, but I know it's in reverse, but the same line repeated, and what it does is it turns out to be a tattered curtain. It's gradually fading away, and it's called "This Fading Generation Has Made Its Mark," an ode to old age. And
I
it's a
love
simple,
that. Yeah.
but
Because as you look down, it just
yeah,
slowly fades. Yep, like it's
and it's
crumbling
more than
further.
poetry. It's more than poetry. It goes beyond poetry into the concept. So we talk about concepts. And we talk about concrete poetry and how it can be conceptual. Then we talk about things like how you can collaborate with other artists like musicians and painters and sculptors to create installation poetry, which is really out there, stuff that very few people do. But if you could do it, then you'll be noticed. So there you are. So that's the book. I hope that's enough for everyone to either whet their appetite or make them run screaming down the street.
So you can get this at Amazon, or you can go to Wheelsong6, all lowercase, okay? Wheelsong6@gmail.com, and you can get copies of this much cheaper. Buy some for your friends if they're even thinking about writing. It'd be a great gift for them. The local library, any place like that. I mean, this is fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Steve. Nothing else you wanna say to people? Leave comments, people, please.
Yeah. I'd like to see some comments, and I might even respond to a few. On the keyboard. So yeah. Tell me what your thoughts are on experimental poetry and what you think about the future of it. We'll see.
And if you're lucky, I'll be in the comments too. I will. I just wanted to feel special.
Wouldn't be the same without you.
So I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. And yes, please consider this. I really sincerely say that. It will help your craft so much, so tremendously. Thank you so much, Steve, and you are amazing for writing this book out and taking the time to do so, and for this interview as well. So,
it's been a pleasure. It's a real pleasure, Brandon. Thanks very much.
The only bummer is I didn't see Dermot or Kermit or Hermit, but that's all right. Maybe that's a good thing. Everything went smoothly.
Let's talk about them.
Okay, yeah, we're not going to talk about them right now. Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you, everyone, and take care. Bye.